All right, so we're diving into some pretty intense news today
Yeah.
coming out of the Middle East. So Israel has launched airstrikes against Iran. And
Oh,
yeah, this is the big deal. We're going to be looking at two reports to kind of get the full picture.
okay.
One from AP News and another from Al Jazeera.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I mean, just to kind of kick things off here,
This is huge.
this
Yeah.
is huge. This is, potentially a turning point for the region, maybe even the world.
Right. Yeah. And what really gets me here is the historical significance of this whole thing. I mean, this isn't just like another border skirmish or something like that. This
Yeah.
is this is the first time Israel has openly claimed responsibility for an attack on Iranian soil.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that alone
It's a big deal.
tells you how high the stakes are.
Mm-hmm.
So, so to make sure we're all on the same page here, let's rewind a little bit.
Okay.
It all really started back on October 7th with that horrific attack by Hamas
Mm.
in Israel, the one that claimed the lives of over 1,200 people.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a truly horrific act of terrorism.
Yeah.
Really, sent shockwaves through Israel and the international community,
Yeah.
and really kind of set the stage for this escalating tension that we're seeing play out.
Yeah, and these are tensions that were, already kind of running high, especially with
Okay.
the conflict in Gaza.
Of course, yeah, and I think it's important to remember that Hamas is considered a proxy group for Iran,
Right.
which means they receive funding, training, and sometimes even direct orders from Tehran.
Hmm.
So when Hamas struck Israel on October 7th, many saw it as a sign of Iran really flexing its muscles in
Yeah.
the region.
And Israel wasn't about to let that slide.
No, absolutely not.
Right. And both articles talk about how Israel immediately responded with that massive offensive in Gaza,
Yeah.
targeting, Hamas
Yeah.
positions and infrastructure.
Right. Which tragically has resulted in a heavy toll on Palestinian civilians.
Mm.
I mean, tens of thousands of casualties, just unimaginable destruction, and a humanitarian crisis that's really only getting worse.
Yeah.
It's truly heartbreaking.
It is. It is. But even amidst the chaos in Gaza, Israel clearly had its sights set on a bigger target,
Mhm.
Iran. And according to the Al Jazeera article, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant started drawing up plans for these airstrikes
Okay.
almost immediately
Interesting.
after the October 7th attack.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that those plans seem to have been pretty carefully calculated
Okay.
because according to the timeline that's laid out in the Al Jazeera report,
Mm-hmm.
there were multiple waves of airstrikes
Mm-hmm.
hitting targets in Tehran and other provinces in Iran. We're talking military sites, missile production facilities,
Wow.
air defense systems,
There's a lot of different targets.
20 sites in total, if you believe Israel's claims.
Yeah, and of course Iran's, downplaying the damage, calling it limited.
Right.
But to really understand how they're doing that, we need to look beyond just the official statements.
Mhm.
The Al Jazeera piece mentions how Iran has released kind of these carefully curated images showing minimal damage,
Right.
but
Yeah.
then simultaneously restricting access to international observers. So,
Well,
it's a classic strategy of controlling the narrative, right?
Yeah.
Like,
it's clever,
it is,
but not entirely convincing.
not entirely.
Especially when you consider this quote from Sanam Vakil of Chatham House,
Mhm.
who's quoted in the Al Jazeera article saying, and I quote, "Iran will play down the impact of the strikes, which are, in fact, quite serious."
Whoa, okay.
So it sounds like there's more to the story than Iran is letting on.
Yeah, I think that's a safe assumption.
Well,
But here's where things get really interesting. Both articles point out that while, Israel did hit a wide range of targets,
Hmm.
they notably avoided hitting oil infrastructure or nuclear facilities.
right. And that makes you wonder why.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if they were truly looking to cripple Iran's military capabilities,
Right.
those would seem like pretty obvious targets.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's where the political dimension comes in.
Mhm.
Remember, the AP article mentions how President Biden had previously stated he wouldn't support an Israeli strike on Iranian nuclear sites.
Right.
So by avoiding those targets, Israel could be trying to stay in the good graces of their most powerful ally,
Mm-hmm.
while still, sending a very strong message
Oh, yeah.
to Iran.
Yeah, it's a delicate balancing act, to say the
Yeah.
least.
Yeah, it is.
And it gets even more complicated when you when you factor in the potential response from Iran.
Oh, of course.
I mean, they're not just going to sit back and take this, are they?
No, of course not. But understanding how they might respond really requires a deeper dive into their capabilities. I mean, what kind of missile technology do they possess? What are the limitations of their air defenses post-strike?
Mm-hmm. And we can't forget about the wild card here, those proxy groups,
Right.
like Hamas and Hezbollah.
Right. And to fully grasp, the role they might play, we need to take a step back and look at, their relationship with Iran.
Yeah.
What are their goals? What are their capabilities? How much influence does Iran really have over them? So let's start with Hamas, I guess, since they're already in the spotlight with the conflict going on in Gaza.
Right.
They're considered to be a militant Islamist group with a strong presence in the Palestinian territories.
Okay.
And their primary goal is to establish an independent Palestinian state. And they see armed resistance as a key part of achieving that goal.
So they're not just like some random group of extremists. Like they have a political agenda.
No, not at all.
And they're willing to use violence
Absolutely.
to achieve it.
And that's where their relationship with Iran gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because, Iran sees Hamas as this valuable ally in their broader regional strategy. They provide them with funding, weapons, training, essentially empowering them to act as this thorn in Israel's side.
It's like a proxy war almost.
It is.
Where Iran can exert influence and destabilize the region without directly engaging in a full-blown conflict.
Right. Yeah. That's a pretty accurate assessment. Now Hezbollah is a bit different.
Okay.
They're based in Lebanon, and they have a much more sophisticated military infrastructure than Hamas. They're also deeply involved in Lebanese politics. They hold seats in parliament.
Wow.
And even ministerial positions.
So they're not just a militant group. They're a political force.
They are
to be reckoned with.
Precisely. And their relationship with Iran is even stronger than Hamas's.
Okay.
Iran sees Hezbollah as a crucial asset in its efforts to counter Israel's military superiority in the region.
Okay.
And they've supplied Hezbollah with advanced weaponry, including long-range missiles that could potentially reach deep into Israeli territory.
Okay, now that's starting to paint a pretty alarming picture. So if Iran wanted to retaliate for these airstrikes, they could either do it directly or through these proxy groups.
That's exactly right. And each option really comes with its own set of risks and potential consequences.
Okay.
Direct military action would be a major escalation. And it's not clear if Iran's military is really fully prepared for that kind of confrontation.
Especially after the damage to their air defenses.
Right. Yeah. The Al Jazeera piece mentions how Israel is claiming that their aircraft all returned safely after the strikes. So it sounds like Iran's defenses weren't quite as robust as they might have hoped. But even with weakened air defenses, Iran still has a significant arsenal of ballistic missiles that could potentially target Israel.
Right.
And don't forget, I mean, they've been developing their missile technology for years, really focusing on accuracy and range.
So even if they can't effectively defend their own airspace,
right,
they could still inflict some serious damage on Israel. And what about those proxy groups? How might they play into all this?
Well, that's where things get even more unpredictable.
Go ahead.
Iran could easily order Hamas to escalate attacks from Gaza, or they could direct Hezbollah to launch a barrage of missiles from Lebanon. Either scenario could really quickly spiral out of control, drawing Israel deeper into a multi-front conflict.
And that's not even considering the potential involvement of other global powers?
Oh, absolutely.
Like Russia or China?
Right. The AP article mentions how both countries have been increasingly assertive in the region, and they might see this crisis as an opportunity to kind of advance their own agendas. I mean, we're already seeing signs of increased Russian involvement in Syria, and China has, steadily been expanding its economic and military influence in the Middle East. So it wouldn't be surprising at all to see them try to capitalize on this situation, either, by providing support to Iran or by using their diplomatic leverage to broker a deal that benefits them.
So this could potentially turn into like a proxy war between superpowers.
It could.
Each vying for control and influence in a region that's already incredibly volatile.
It's a chilling thought.
It is.
But not entirely out of the realm of possibility.
And all of this is happening against the backdrop of the upcoming U.S. election.
Oh, right. Yeah. American politics always seems to find a way into global affairs.
It's unavoidable, especially in a situation like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the outcome of the election could have a huge impact on U.S. policy in the Middle East, which in turn could influence how this conflict unfolds. So depending on who wins, we could see a shift toward either like more aggressive intervention or renewed push for diplomacy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's also, the internal situation in Iran.
Right.
I mean, they're facing some serious economic challenges due to sanctions.
Yeah.
And there's always the potential for domestic unrest.
Right.
And that could definitely influence their decision making when it comes to responding to Israel.
It's like a pressure cooker. If the internal pressure gets too high, they might feel the need to lash out externally as a way to distract from their own problems. It's a classic dictator's dilemma.
It is, and it really highlights just how complex and interconnected all of this is. I mean, you've got regional rivalries, you've got political maneuvering, you've got economic factors, you've got social tensions, and then this looming shadow of superpower involvement, all kind of swirling together in this really dangerous and unpredictable mix.
Yeah, it's enough to make anyone's head spin.
It is.
So let's try to unpack all this and look at some potential scenarios.
Okay.
The articles both kind of outline a few possibilities ranging from, a measured response to a full-blown regional war. What are some of the most likely outcomes?
Yeah.
We should be considering here.
Well, one possibility is that Iran chooses to respond in a limited way, maybe through their proxies in Gaza or Lebanon. They could launch a few missiles, carry out some symbolic attacks, just enough to kind of show that they're not backing down without provoking a full-scale Israeli retaliation.
So kind of like a tit-for-tat escalation.
It is, yeah.
With each side trying to inflict pain without triggering an all-out war.
Right. Yeah. It's a dangerous game, but it's one that's been played before in this region. The problem is that even limited strikes can have unintended consequences. A stray missile, a miscalculation, a sudden surge in public anger.
Yeah.
Any of those things could really quickly escalate the situation beyond anyone's control.
And the other possibility is that Iran decides to go all in, launch a major offensive against Israel.
Right. That's the worst case scenario, and it's one that we can't afford to ignore.
Right.
If Iran were to unleash its full military might, or if they were to coordinate a massive attack through Hezbollah, the consequences would be absolutely devastating. We're talking potentially thousands of casualties, widespread destruction, and a conflict that could easily spill over into neighboring countries.
And that's not even considering the potential impact on global energy markets or the risk of drawing in other superpowers.
Exactly. Yeah. A full-scale war in the Middle East would have ripple effects felt all around the world. It would be a humanitarian catastrophe, an economic disaster, and a geopolitical nightmare.
Okay, so we've got a lot of potential scenarios here.
We do.
Most of them pretty grim. But before we get too lost in hypotheticals here, let's bring it back to the specifics of this attack.
Okay.
Israel didn't just launch these airstrikes out of nowhere.
No.
They had their reasons.
They did.
Right.
Absolutely. And to fully understand those reasons, we need to really delve into the specific threats that Israel perceived and how the October 7th attack really shaped their decision making.
That makes sense. I mean, we've talked a lot about the potential consequences and the bigger picture, but we haven't really looked at it from Israel's perspective. What were they thinking? What were they trying to achieve?
Well, both the AP News and Al Jazeera articles really highlight Israel's framing this as retaliation. They're arguing that these airstrikes were a direct response to, a series of missile attacks launched by Iran and its proxies earlier this year.
So they're basically saying, like, you hit us, so we're hitting back.
Essentially, yeah. Yeah, the AP piece details attacks back in April and another missile attack just this month.
Right.
A lot of those were thankfully intercepted before reaching their targets. But it's clear that Israel felt the need to send a stronger message.
And this wasn't just some isolated incident. This came right after that devastating attack on October 7th.
Of course. When
Hamas killed over 1,200 people in Israel. Right.
That attack, which both articles reference, really shook Israel to its core. And it's understandable that they're on high alert and feeling incredibly vulnerable. They see a clear and present danger coming from Iran and its allies.
Especially with that attack by Hamas triggering Israel's massive offensive in Gaza, which has sadly resulted in tens of thousands of Palestinian casualties.
Right. It's a truly, truly tragic situation. And in the midst of all this, Israel is pointing the finger at Iran, claiming they're the ones pulling the strings.
So they're essentially saying Iran is the puppet master behind all this regional instability.
That's the narrative they're pushing. And they're using this recent history of missile attacks as evidence. Whether or not that's the full story is debatable, but it's certainly the lens through which Israel is viewing this conflict.
And that lens clearly led them to take pretty drastic action with these airstrikes.
Yeah, it did.
But where does this leave us now? What are the long-term consequences of this escalation?
That's the question everyone's grappling with, right? The potential for further escalation is very real. I mean, we could see more attacks, more retaliation, and a wider regional conflict.
And as we discussed earlier, the U.S. elections and the involvement of other world powers could just throw even more fuel on the fire.
Absolutely. I mean, we're dealing with a tinderbox here, and any number of things could really set it ablaze.
So what does all of this mean for our listener? Like, what should they be paying attention to as this situation unfolds?
Well, first and foremost, pay attention to Iran's response. Will they retaliate directly, or will they use proxies? And if so, what will be the scale and scope of their actions? Those are crucial questions that will really shape the trajectory of this conflict.
And what about the role of other countries? Should we be watching for any signs of increased involvement from the U.S., Russia, China, others?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the actions or inactions of these global players could be decisive. Will they try to mediate? Will they provide military support to one side or the other? Those are things to keep a close eye on.
And of course, the situation in Gaza and Lebanon is inextricably linked.
Oh, it is, yeah.
To this conflict.
It is.
Any escalation there could easily spill over and vice versa.
Precisely. It's all connected. Yeah. And as we've emphasized throughout this whole deep dive, the level of uncertainty is incredibly high.
Right.
There are so many variables at play that predicting the future is nearly impossible.
So what's the takeaway here? What's the one thing our listeners should walk away understanding about this situation?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we've entered a new era of instability in the Middle East. This attack on Iran has shattered the status quo and created a whole new set of challenges and dangers.
And those dangers have the potential to reach far beyond.
Oh, absolutely.
The region itself.
Absolutely. This isn't just a regional conflict anymore. Right. It has global implications, and the consequences could be felt around the world.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you with a final thought to ponder. given the potential for global involvement, how might this conflict reshape the balance of power in the world? What role will diplomacy or the lack thereof play in determining the ultimate outcome? Those are questions we'll all be wrestling with in the weeks and months to come. Until next time, stay curious and stay engaged.